What's up, Sales RXers? Look, with outbound conversion rate benchmarks being as low as 3%, it's no secret that it's really tough right now for a lot of sellers. And if you're an individual contributor or a senior leader in marketing, RevOps, sales, any role that has a revenue related metric that you have to attain, it's time to find a better pipeline channel. So what's better than selling to someone who doesn't know you or your product? Selling to someone who does. This is where Champify comes in. Champify monitors key contacts at accounts like champions, post-sale sponsors, admins, heavy users, and they enrich that data to detect job changes, determine relevancy for outreach, and then assigns and alerts reps with those newly assigned leads. So if you haven't tried out Champify yet, you need to give it a shot. Stop spinning your wheels with outbound heavy sales motions and start selling to people you've already sold to. You can click the link below in the show description for an extended proof of concept and free data test from the team at Champify. What you'll do is click podcast in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Let them know that the Sales RX podcast sent you so they know who to give the VIP treatment to. Now let's jump into today's episode. Why don't most companies do that? Why do they get so hung up on personas? Is it because they haven't grasped this concept of compatibility and selling to the person? Or is it simply because they don't have the resources, the tools, or knowledge on how to do it?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both, right? So it's a newer technology that not a lot of organizations are familiar with. But if you think about it, like say we take disc selling as a example. Disc selling is not a new concept, right? Mm-hmm. Just in the past, it's been very difficult. You know, you have to read people's language, what they say, how they say it, whether that's virtually or in person, to be able to identify what personality type they might be. For you to, you know, are they a relationship-driven person? Are they a ROI-driven person? What are their communication styles and preferences? So the concept of like disc selling has been around for a long time, but there hasn't been a lot of technology to make that easy for your average seller. A lot of sellers don't take the time to study human psychology. You're selling to people, so understanding the behaviors and the preferences, things to avoid, what are the winning mantras with those particular people. This is not a way of selling that a lot of sales organizations are teaching their sellers.
Yeah, that's interesting. And you said something interesting. I'm going to look it up real quick because I want to make sure I'm not an idiot. I'm saying the right thing. Isn't the psychology of selling, isn't there like a famous person who talks about that, but like we kind of like threw it at the wayside? Because you're right. We don't talk about that. I think it was, Brian Tracy. Yeah. Super famous. So it's like a whole thing that.
Yeah, just a little bit.
A little bit. Yeah. You might have heard of him. I don't know. Zig Ziglar. You maybe heard of him too. I don't know. So why do you think we strayed away from these methods of psychology selling, which it sounds like people in the past have done, if there are people that have made a career off those methods, right? Like a Brian Tracy. Where do you think people were just trying to be differentiators and they came up with persona-based selling, so we took it a little bit differently? Or why do you think we dropped off on psychology selling?
Yeah, there hasn't been enough training or enablement around, enabling sellers to do it really well, right? Like reading a book, is half the battle, but like actually putting that stuff into application and making it part of your, sales culture of how we sell to people isn't something that's taught on a regular basis. And there hasn't been a lot of tools to make this easier until now, right? This technology is available now, through processing people's digital footprints to see what their personality type is. Are they a goal-oriented person? Are they, slower paced person? Are they more, focused on details? These are all things that we can identify around people. And so that changes a lot of things and enables you to actually personalize the entire sales process, all the way from prospecting of maybe filtering who you reach out to and who you don't, or what the context of that messaging actually says. If it's a goal-oriented person, you're going to focus more on how your, solution or how you solve a problem that aligns with the goals that they have in that type of role. If they're a relationship-driven person, then you might, frame it up in a way where you're talking about how, you enable them to build more relationships with their ideal customer profile. So how you say things in context can change based on the type of person that they are, all the way from prospecting through negotiating. There's some people that are slower paced people, and the more that you pressure and them to move fast, it's going to work against you. So these are all things that can be identified based on their personality of what quadrant they're in. And it really starts with knowing yourself, like knowing what your own personality type is, because that's going to tell you your own personality type in a way of how you prefer to be sold to, how your different communication styles and preferences. And everybody's going to always be most comfortable with their own natural tendencies, right? So for example, if you're and we're following DISC here, right? So if you're a DS type person, then you're going to work well with people that are similar to you. And that's where the compatibility comes into place. If you're working with somebody that is, in very different quadrants than yourself, then it's going to require you to get a little bit out of your comfort zone and sell in a way that you necessarily wouldn't want to be sold to, but it's the way that your buyer wants to buy.
Yeah. So let's put this into practice a little bit. So we have a lot of individual contributors as well as sales leaders that listen to the show. So let's say I'm an SDR and I'm doing prospecting, or I'm an AE and I'm in the middle of some deal cycles, or I'm a sales leader and I'm like, I got to do something different because I'm having to do more with less. But I'm not at the point where I can find or purchase or procure technology to do this yet. What is like something basic I can do to start looking at my prospects this way and selling to them better? Would it be as simple as go learn about DISC a little bit yourself and do a DISC assessment yourself, or where can I get started if I'm in one of those buckets?
Yeah, so you're basically saying, how can you educate yourself about these things without necessarily spending any money on technology?
Yeah.
Yeah, so a couple things. You can, there's tons of resources available on DISC. That is a good place to start. Running your own profile, right? So obviously I'm biased, but Humantic, you can, download a free trial of Humantic. You can run your own profile. You can actually run up to 50 profiles. And just like, even with prospects that you have active deals in, or even just your own profile, that level of self-awareness will help you tremendously, because then you'll be able to identify these things. I'll give you a great example. I was on a sales call the other day. I was able to identify this person's personality in advance to the call. And he's the particular type of person that really enjoys small talk. And that's not the case for everybody. There are certain types where that drives them nuts. They're like, come on, chat, get to the point, right? I don't care about, all this small talk. Well, there's a large amount of people that do. And so I engaged in some small talk before we sort of set the agenda for the meeting and jumped in. And you could see the gentleman just light up as a Christmas tree. Like that was, you could tell that was exactly the type of thing that matters most to him, because relationships matter, are very important. It doesn't mean that like other things don't matter, but it's something that takes precedence over others. So that's like a real practical application. Another really good practice is to kind of look at the current customers and people who have bought your product or service, and see what personality types they are, because then that's going to give you a good sense of what types you're most likely to win with, either as an individual seller or at company-wide level. Because then you can do some interesting things like only focus your outbound on people that you have a much higher likelihood of winning with. Or you can even do lead scoring and prioritizing leads based on personality types as well.
Mm-hmm. Right, because in DISC, isn't there a certain thing where it's like, I think of it like the business world version of the zodiac signs, right? Like certain people are more compatible with others in the way that they communicate. So if I'm like a high D, low C person, maybe I want to communicate first and foremost and prioritize people that are similar, or that I am more compatible with than maybe someone who's like a high I, where it's kind of like, we're not really on the same page there. I'm a little bit more demanding and commanding. They're a little bit more data-driven and introverted, correct? Is that kind of like the concept behind that prioritization?
Yeah, because as a seller, you're always gonna default to the way that you would work best if you were on the other side of the seat, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if as a seller, if I was a buyer, I'm going to sell based on the things that matter most to me, right? So if I'm an I type or if I have a variation of I in my personality, then that means small talk and relationship building and friendliness are really important to me. So that's the way that I'm going to sell, right? But when you come across people where that's not the case, right? Maybe they're a D type and they're very goal oriented, and you need to show them how your solution aligns with their goal. Then if you're selling the way that you would if you were on the other seat of the table to somebody that's not that same type as you, that's going to be counterintuitive. Here's an example that I like to give often, and sometimes people find it kind of funny, but I think you'll appreciate it, Chet. Some people love bullet points. When you're sending
Mm-hmm.
them across information in an email, maybe you have quite a few things that you need to mention, and a lot of people default to putting those in bullet points. Now, with some personality types, that's great because that's the way that they love to receive it and they process information well.
Mm-hmm.
Others, not so well. They hate bullet points. It
Mm-hmm.
drives them nuts.
Yeah.
And these are the type of insights that you can have on these people. This is the sort of technology that's available today. And just think about it for a second. Let's say you're an AE, you're in an active deal. Chet's my buyer here, and I send Chet bullet points. And bullet points drives Chet crazy. He hates bullet points. He hates receiving information like that. Well, what do you think happens? That sits in Chet's inbox for a week, 2 weeks. No action gets taken. That's enough to slow your deal down, or even in some cases, actually kill your deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really unique because it's true, right? And there might even be suggestions that are made that at least give you a base starting point of where you can take the conversation or what you need to do to be able to speak effectively to this person. Now, I want to take it back to the compatibility thing. So I know you've been a successful sales leader many times in the past. You've helped companies go from 0 to 100 million in ARR. As a sales leader, let's put on our sales leaders hats for a second. How do you feel about having certain reps speaking to people that they're not as compatible with? Do you redelegate those opportunities or those leads to people that are compatible? Do you go that deep with it? Or is that kind of like, hey, first just understand DISC and start using it before you start getting really complicated with your compatibility scoring? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's Chad. It's really a tough question because there's two ways to approach it here, right? It's either you're enabling all your sellers to be able to be very flexible and very adaptable, depending on who it is that they're dealing with, right? And I think a lot of times it really depends on what your deal cycles and size looks like, right? If you're very transactional and it's sort of lower value ARR deals, then I think it makes a lot of sense for sellers to just be a little bit more based on compatibility, where it's like, hey, Chet, you work with people that you're compatible with, right? So, Chet, you're actually an SD type, right? So, you would work with people that are compatible with SD, right? And so that's one approach is to put your reps with people, actually route leads based on compatibility. The other approach is to really enable your sales team to adopt this way of selling through and through, all the way from prospecting from your SDRs to BDRs, and then aligning them with AEs that they're compatible with as well.
Mm.
And the reason for that is because when you get into larger deal sizes, there's just too many people involved in the sales process, right?
Yeah.
So compatibility sort of goes out the window when you have 5, 6, or sometimes even more people involved in the deal, right? You're always going to have a champion, but like that can change. Like who your champion is can change, and so you have sort of less control over, aligning reps only with prospects that they're compatible with.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. So the best way probably would really just to be teach people how to leverage the tool correctly so they know how to sell to the person that they're talking to, and make sure that they're staying accountable to that instead of just being incredibly niche. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, and I think if you're very transactional, lower deal size, then maybe it makes more sense to go the compatibility route, rather than just really enabling your sellers to have that adaptability and being flexible with knowing how to sell different types. So that's, kind of the exception there. But I think, the best way to get started, right, is to really understand these different types and to understand yourself. So understand yourself first, have that level of self-awareness is going to help you. But then I think the biggest thing of rather than the best place to get started is just to know what you need to avoid. Like, what are the certain things that are traps with particular types of people? And that's a really good place to start. And then, you can start to really dig into, more about the actual people, what matters most to them, how to adjust and adapt things in the sales process. But if you at least just know what you absolutely should not do with each personality type, that is a great place to start.
Yeah, and I can see a lot of areas where even on the farther down the funnel, when you're trying to close the deal, how this could really help, especially with building urgency. If you're getting ghosted, like what's going to make them actually like re-engage with you, maybe reviving deals that are on the brink of being lost. Like that's the part that really interests me. I think sometimes the top funnel stuff is a real big numbers game, but the farther you go down the funnel, the more serious it gets and the more strategic the plays need to be. And I think something like this is incredibly eye-opening, right? Like just thinking about it now, I'm in a couple open deals for Sales Doctor, and I can think of like two people where they literally said on the call, one of the reasons we're talking today is because I've watched a lot of your content and we speak the same language. Well, if they speak the same language, they probably fit into some sort of compatibility of the way that I talk, what I talk about, the passion behind what I talk about, my concepts. And so it's like, that's really interesting because I'm wondering if I focus more on that compatibility, I could spend my time in places that paid better dividends and places where people just weren't going to resonate with what I'm talking about, especially when you're in the world of content creation and you put your thought and opinions out there. And some people might go, well, I think cold calling is dead, or I think this, or I think that. And so they don't gel with what you're saying because you're taking a stance on something from personal experience. But Collin, as we wrap up the episode, what's something that we haven't talked about regarding selling to the person instead of the persona that you think is valuable for the listeners to hear?
Yeah, I think, we covered a lot here and it can feel a bit overwhelming. Just to kind of circle back to something I mentioned there briefly, and also, Chet, what you said is right on, right? If you're creating content, you're going to attract those like-minded people, which is a very powerful tool to build trust and rapport with the people you're most likely to win with. But just to give you like a few examples, right? Some things to avoid, if you're selling to a D type, like small talk is unnecessary. I types are very focused on relationships. So being transactional is that like trap that you want to avoid. S types are typically much slower. So trying to rush them, create urgency, or like, do the whole discount to close the deal, like that's going to go over terrible with those types of people. Being vague with a C type is something you really want to avoid. And so those are kind of some basics that you can kind of think about on knowing what to avoid with particular types of people.
Yeah, and I love how you say, like, if you don't know what to do, just think about what not to do. That's usually your roadmap to success, right? Like, people say all the time, like, how can I be a successful SDR, a successful AI? I can tell you, well, what not to do, because it changes every company. Some companies are different. Your metrics or your keys to success might be a little bit different. There might be some nuance, but I can definitely tell you the things not to do, like SDRs. Don't ask your manager about being promoted to AE every week for 6 months straight after you hit quota one time. Like, come on, like, let's prove it a little bit longer, earn those stripes. You know what I'm saying? Collin, great stuff. I really like this idea of compatibility and making your sellers compatible with their buyers. Where can people engage with you if they want to learn more?
Yeah, best place is LinkedIn. Very active on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me there.
To all of our listeners, if you want to engage with the Sales RX community further, there will be a link to our LinkedIn page, as well as a link to Collin's LinkedIn show notes. That's all we have for you today. We'll catch you on the next one. Thanks, Collin.
Thanks.